Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's program titled Advantages of the SBA 8A Program. My name is Randy Evans. I'm an attorney in private practice, and I also serve as the chair of the Tribal Telecom and Technology Conference Advisory Council. I'll be your host for today's program. Our speakers today are Vanessa Gleach and Stephen Koprince, and I'll be introducing them in just a couple minutes. As a matter of personal introduction, I was raised in northwest New Mexico on and near the Navajo Reservation. My wife is Navajo, and I got involved in this arena of working with tribal telecommunications through work that I was doing in the area of telecom taxation, and then also working with tribes and companies that were doing work with tribes on tax issues, and that eventually led into my getting involved working more specifically in the arena of tribal telecommunications. I want to talk a little bit before we get into today's program about the Tribal Telecom Conference. And the annual Tribal Telecom and Technology Conference, it serves as a gathering place to share information, explore solutions, and to create new possibilities for pathways across the digital divide in Indian country, and to make information and communications technologies accessible to American Indian and Alaskan Native communities. Key focus areas of the conference include infrastructure, community and economic development, culture, education and government, and public safety, emergency management, and health. Our fourth annual Tribal Telecom Conference will be held in Albuquerque, New Mexico, on May 4 through 7, 2015. Be sure to mark your calendars for those dates and visit our conference website for more information, and we'll provide more information about that at the end of the program. A little bit about the webinar series. Following this year's 2014 conference in February, we received a number of requests for year-round educational opportunities that expand on and supplement the topics addressed at the annual conference, and that was what then, those requests are what then gave way to this Tribal Telecom webinar series. So as for today's agenda, our formal program is going to run about 40 minutes, and then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. So if you do have questions during the program, on your GoToWebinar toolbox, it's up on your computer screen, you'll see a box there for questions, and you can just type your questions in. You can do that at any time during the program. If your question relates to something specifically that Vanessa or Steve are talking about, then I will jump in and present that question to them at that time. And if it's a more general question, and then we'll save that for the Q&A period at the end of the program. And so now with that, to introduce today's presenters, we're very fortunate to have today with us Vanessa Gleach, who is the Program Manager at the American Indian Chamber Education Fund Procurement Technical Assistance Center, or PTAC. Vanessa is responsible for the direct oversight of the PTAC program and provides a broad range of strategic and tactical government procurement counseling, training, and education to Native American businesses and tribal enterprises within the states of California, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. We're also very privileged to have with us today on the webinar Stephen Koprince. And Steve is a partner in a Lawrence, Kansas law firm focusing primarily on federal government contracts and small business law. Steve is also the author of the Small Business Guide to Government Contracts, and he's published a number of articles on government contracting. And their contact information for both of them will be available at the end of the slide presentation. And with that introduction, I'm going to turn the program over to Vanessa to begin today's program.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us present today. We're going to be going through the process of the 8A certification program, and we're going to cover 4 components: the overview and benefits of the program, the 8A requirements, eligibility, application submission, the process, and how to respond to deficiencies denials, and the appeal process if you should be denied entrance into the 8A program. Go ahead, Randy. A lot of times companies want to know what the benefits of the 8A program are. And this program was set up to assist small disadvantaged businesses to compete in the economy. Right now what we are finding is a lot of small businesses were competing against large businesses, but in order to level the playing field, they developed a program which allowed just those 8A certified companies to compete amongst themselves. Now, one of the advantages of the 8A program is that you can be sole sourced up to $4 million per contract. And it is a 9-year program for everyone, whether you're tribally owned or individually owned. And the benefit, in order to expand your qualifications as a firm, is the mentor-protege program. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of companies get into the 8A program, not only for sole source opportunities, but to be mentored by a large firm, meaning proposal development, access to their labor pool, increasing their bonding capacity. So there's just a wide array of things that a company can learn from a large business. Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that pretty much hits the major points. I mean, folks, and again, hi everyone. This is Steve Coperns here. I mean, I'm frequently asked by clients, you know, what's the best preference program for federal government contracting, and I tell them the 8A program. It can be the most difficult program to get into in some cases based on the requirements and the application process, which we'll discuss shortly. But the benefits are tremendous, and there are a lot of companies out there that have done very, very well in the program, both through the sole source awards, through the competitive 8A awards, and through taking advantage of the mentoring opportunities that are available to participants. So I think that hits all the points, and those are all, I think, important. Those are powerful benefits. Those are really powerful benefits that are afforded.
Okay. Now, as far as how do you qualify? You have to be a U.S. citizen by birth or naturalization. That's the biggest one of the biggest requirements. And the company has to be at least 51% owned by a controlled and managed by a socially and economically disadvantaged individual. Okay. What they mean by economically disadvantaged, that means that the personal net worth of the qualifying individual can exceed $250,000. Now, with that said, when you figure out your personal net worth, your primary residence is factored out of that, because we do have companies that are in California where they may be living in a house that's worth $350,000. So if it's the primary residence, it's factored out. The equity in your company is also factored out. So they take a look at a lot of things when you're figuring out your net worth. If you have life insurance, if it is a whole life and you can borrow against it, that does have value. So you have to include that into what they have as SBA's 413 form, which is your personal financial history. So that gets figured into your personal net worth. IRAs also get figured into your personal net worth. So it's you as a business owner really need to take a look at this section if you're pretty close to that $250,000. If you are, the additional thing is that you as a disadvantaged owner, if you're one of the 5 classifications that have been identified by SBA, meaning you're Native American, African American, Asian Pacific Islander, Hispanic, or what's the other one, Steve? I'm forgetting one more.
I'm sorry, which are the ones that you had named? I'm sorry, I didn't hear which ones exactly you had named.
There's one more classification I'm always forgetting, but if you're one of those 5 designated groups, you've already been determined to be socially disadvantaged. So you're not required to submit a social disadvantage statement. So what you would be putting together would be an economic disadvantage, how your company is economically disadvantaged in comparison to other companies. A few examples would be that you're not able to compete in your bonding capacity may not be as large as your next competitor, or the fact that you don't have access to a large labor pool. So there could be barriers that would prohibit you as a company to compete among other businesses in your category. And that's what we're talking about as far as the economic disadvantage of a company. It's talking about the company and you as the individual company. Now, under 13 CFR 124.103, that designates the groups of social disadvantage. Now, if you are not from one of those groups that have been identified, say you are a female Caucasian woman that's in construction or in environmental, which is predominantly male oriented, you could put together a social disadvantage, how you've been socially discriminated against being a woman in the construction field. And there have been cases where women have got accepted into the program because, you know, they've submitted proposals, or that the contracting officer won't talk to them. They'd rather talk to their program manager or their project manager who is male. So you would actually have to list what those instances have been where you've been discriminated against. So, but you can you can apply if there's that discrimination. You want to add anything, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a good overview of that. The SBA's regulations say social and economic disadvantage, and that's a great overview of what it is. You're either presumed disadvantaged socially, or you have to prove your disadvantage. I've helped a number of Caucasian women, for example, get into the program based on discrimination that they've faced in their personal lives. I would say that when it comes to individuals who are not presumed socially disadvantaged, the SBA does have a pretty high standard for that. I think it is helpful if you've got, for example, someone that's in the construction industry, showing that the industry is not historically friendly toward women owners, for example. But the SBA in that does require more than just I'm a member of a group that's in an industry that's been historically hostile, or at least not friendly to women. You need to show personal incidents that happened in your life. What the SBA is looking for is a detailed narrative that shows personal instances of bias or discrimination and the effect that those incidents had on you. And so when I'm working with an applicant who's not in those presumed disadvantaged groups, we work really, really hard on these social disadvantage narratives. And I think that's one thing that first-time applicants often don't understand, just how important it is to do that really thoroughly, and also what the SBA is really looking for. And I won't get too much into the weeds on it in this call, but it's important to understand exactly kind of the format and what the structure of that narrative should look like if you're not in that presumed category, because you've got a whole other hurdle that you need to cross before you can get admitted to the program. It's not insurmountable depending on your personal experiences, but it is an extra hoop that you have to jump through. And then one other thing I want to point out with respect to economic disadvantage, and Vanessa, I think, talked at length about the net worth requirement. That's obviously important. The SBA will submit a form that will allow you to determine your net worth with the exclusions that Vanessa talked about there. There's also an income requirement, and the SBA will tell you that you're not considered socially disadvantaged if your average income over the last 3 completed tax return years exceeds $250,000. So it's the same number as the net worth, $250,000. It's an income test. that's a presumption that you're not socially disadvantaged. If there's some reason why in 1 year your income exceeded that mark, an unusually high level of income due to an inheritance, or you did great in Vegas on the slots or something 1 year, something that's not likely to reoccur, they'll take that into account. But there's really two prongs to the income test: net worth and average income over the last 3 years. It's also important to note that once you get into the program, once you're admitted to the program, there are still ceilings on net worth and income, but they do increase during your tenure in the program. Under current rules, your income must remain at 350 or under, and your net worth at 750 or under. The SBA will be looking at those at your financials every year to see how you're doing with respect to those numbers.
Exactly. And the other thing I wanted to mention that I kind of I should actually have it as an additional bullet, but one of the biggest obstacles that a lot of our companies run into is the control and management of the firm. And this really plays a role when we're looking at the construction industry or we're looking at A&E firms, that they look at the business of the qualifying person, the 51% owner, to have the expertise in the field. And not only the fact that you know how construction is constructed, or you know how to put up a building, and you know measurements, you're ordering supplies, but they also require you to possess the necessary licenses. And a lot of times we run into this issue where it's husband and wife or a family business, where the qualifying party actually doesn't hold the contractor's license. And that is the reason why some applicants get denied, because they take a look at it that if this person who is the qualifying party should leave, well then you as a company cannot perform on contract because you no longer hold the contractor's license. So it's very important that you exemplify that you have total control and management of that business. And I would say probably 8 out of 10 times, that's one of the biggest reasons why companies get denied, is because of the management and control of the company.
Vanessa and Steve, in the arena of tribal telecom, service delivery, tribal broadband deployment and service delivery, and then in the wider context of just tribes engaging with technology and the increase of technology companies that are doing work on tribal lands and with tribal communities, we really see two different types of entities or enterprises, and one is what you've really been talking about, which is the minority-owned business, and so that could be the Native American-owned business from a tribal member, but we also see a lot of activity in the arena of tribally-owned enterprises. Can you talk a little bit about how the 8A program applies in that context for companies that are owned not by the individuals but by the tribes themselves?
Okay. When you have a tribal enterprise, what the SBA likes to see is that it's being managed by a member of the tribe, and if not, then at least you have some kind of transition plan in place where you're training somebody from the tribe to eventually be the manager of the enterprise. Where we see a lot of denial when it comes to tribal applications is when a tribe has an investor. And what happens is the investor owns more than 10% of the company. Because what that means is then they start looking at affiliation issues, which opens up a whole new set of issues for the enterprise. Because when they start looking at affiliation, then you can actually be deemed by SBA at not being small by SBA side standards because of the personal or because of the net worth of your partner. So what happens is if it's better for most tribal enterprises to own the enterprise 100%. And if they are going to have an investor, the investor owns at least 9% or less. And Steve, I mean, you would probably, that'd probably be a lot of your clients, tribal enterprises.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's, it's an important distinction here in the 8A program, and these slides, of course, focus on the individuals, requirements for individuals to own an 8A company. There are really two separate but somewhat overlapping sets of rules, and I think Vanessa's, describing some of those. There's the set of rules for companies that are owned by one or more individuals, and that could include individual Native Americans who can be, if you're an enrolled member of a tribe, an Alaskan Native, Hawaiian Native, then you can own individually an 8A company and qualify likely as socially disadvantaged without having to go through that extra hoop I was talking about previously. There's also a separate set of rules whereby tribes themselves can own 8A companies, and they need to qualify those companies under rules that have some of the same components as the individual rules, but also some different requirements, especially regarding management. The tribe, again, itself can own the 8A company. The management is typically, as Vanessa mentioned, would be through tribal members or with the ultimate control at least being by the tribe. And the tribe itself, by the way, also needs to qualify as economically disadvantaged. And so a tribe that's trying to get its first 8A company qualified needs to get the SBA to issue determination that the tribe itself, and that's maybe based on census data, surveys, other statistical evidence, the tribe itself is economically disadvantaged. From that point forward, the tribe can qualify additional 8A companies, because tribes can own more than one, by the way. It can qualify additional 8A companies without having to reprove that the tribe itself is socially disadvantaged. So there's some different rules out there. This particular presentation doesn't get too far into the weeds or into the weeds really at all about how tribes would qualify, but that's something I think that Vanessa and I probably could both discuss at great length offline or at the end of this presentation at the question session with anyone who has questions about how a tribe might go about qualifying its first or second or third 8A company under tribal ownership.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa and Steve both. That's very helpful. And like I said, in the arena of tribal telecom, we've got about 10 or 12 tribes that actually own their own telecom carrier, licensed exchange carrier, but a number of other tribes that have where the tribe itself owns an internet service provider or some other type of company that is involved in either providing telecommunication services or otherwise engaged with technology. So I think that's very helpful, Steve, as far as that, that there's one track for Native American owned or other minority owned businesses, but then the tribe itself can also qualify.
Vanessa, you ready to get back to the slides?
Yeah, next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, and one of the other requirements is that you have to be in business at least 2 years, but there is a waiver if you've been in business less than 2 years. That there's a process that you'll have to write a narrative talking about how you would be successful and basically qualifying your company to be accepted into the program. And our PTAC, we have a format that companies can follow that have been in business less than 2 years. We probably get about 50-50 as far as companies coming in to do their applications, to submit their applications to SBA. So, that is one thing that they prefer that you be in business at least 2 years, but it isn't required. You need to be in business at least six months because you have to have some type of financial data in order for them to evaluate whether or not you would have enough revenue to perform on a federal contract. So that is one of the things they take a look at. The applicant must be small in its primary NAICS code. So you as a company would determine what your primary NAICS code, and NAICS code stands for North American Industry Classification System. So there are two different ways companies are considered small. It's you're either going to be revenue-based or you're going to be employee-based. If you're manufacturing, distributing products, you're going to be employee-based. If you're into services, meaning construction, IT, those types of things, you're going to be revenue-based. So, it's important that you know what your size standard is and whether or not, you are considered small. The business must demonstrate potential for success. What that means is that you, as a business owner, they take a look at your last 3 years of financials. And if you're showing a loss and your loss is growing each year, then the program isn't set up to get you out of debt. The program is there to help you grow as a company. So, it may be very difficult for you to get into the program if each year you're showing a loss. So you're going to really have to demonstrate to SBA how it is that you're going to be able to perform, successfully on a contract. The principals, the owners must, and this means owners of the company and board members must exhibit good character. And what that means is there is a SBA Form 9112 form, and in there it'll ask questions whether or not you have been debarred. If you've been debarred and you're an owner, you're not going to get certified. That's just, you might as well not even submit your application. The other thing it's going to talk about is whether or not you have a felony, maybe you've embezzled money or something like that, then, probably unlikely that you're going to get into the program. So, if we do have businesses, we deal with business from all over the United States, and there are companies that will come in and ask, well, I did get a DUI, back when I was in college. That won't prohibit you from getting into the program, but what you will have to do is you will have to disclose this information to SBA, listing the specific date, what if you were sentenced or you had to pay a fine or you were on probation. You will also have to submit a fingerprint card with your application. In addition to that, you will also have to, if it was a DUI, you're going to also have to pull your driving record from motor vehicle, showing that you don't have any infractions on your driving record. And then you also have to show from the court that everything, that your fine has been paid and everything has been resolved. So, those are things that you would have to show SBA as far as the character. If you check any yes, any of the questions with a yes on that form. So,
you mentioned earlier about you'd have to show that you haven't been, I think the term you used was debarred. Could you or Steve explain what that means?
What debarment means is that you as a company, maybe you worked for a company or maybe you were a manager or something of a company and you defaulted on a federal contract. Or you had a contract and maybe you cheated the government in some way and you had to pay the money back to the government. What happens is they terminated your contract and you received a fine, or you had some kind of infraction with the government, and that's most of the time for debarment. I don't know if you run into any other debarments.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to debarment. It's something that I deal with. I hate to deal with it. Debarment is essentially the process by which a company, and I think Vanessa raises exactly some of the situations in which it occurs. But to cut straight to the chase, debarment means that either you personally or the company is prohibited from doing business with the federal government. I mean, debarment is a list of essentially of companies and people who, for a certain period of time, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the case may be, sometimes longer, are not allowed to contract with the federal government unless there are compelling reasons, for the government to do so, or for subcontract under $30,000. So it's essentially it's the it's the naughty list. It's the list of people who, for one reason or another, have been found to be to lack the integrity, essentially, to do business with the federal government. The debarment regulations say that debarment is appropriate when there's a risk to the government, essentially, that working with a particular contractor would harm the taxpayers, harm the government. Usually, when it comes up, it's an ethical issue. I mean, if there's ethical problems, false claims, et cetera, that's when I find that debarment actually most oftenly arises. You'll know if you're debarred, by the way. So if you've been debarred, you're going to know you're debarred. But for someone who is, if you're the CEO or president of an 8A, prospective 8A, it's important to note that debarment and suspension, which is kind of the precursor to debarment, but it also means that you can't perform on a government contract for a shorter period of time, 6 months, for example. When an individual is suspended or debarred, that individual's suspension or debarment can be imputed to their employer. So if you've got a top manager, officer, director, someone who's personally been debarred, you as a contractor could find yourself unable to bid on federal contracts. So most of the people, probably everybody on this call, knows that neither they nor any of their principals have been suspended or debarred. But as your company grows and you're bringing on more people into top positions, you're checking that list. It's a public list, by the way, of who's suspended or debarred before you bring someone on, and that you're having, your employee handbook specifies that if any employee, officer, director, et cetera, knows or has reason to believe that they are going to become suspended or debarred, that they tell you that right away because it could affect your business. So that's suspension and debarment kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Got it. And there's a related, or kind of, it's not a follow-up, but it's a related question. Vanessa, you had mentioned earlier about if a company is operating at a loss, that it would be difficult to go through the application process because the SBA wants to see that you have the potential for success. The question is that, well, a two-part question. One is, do owners have to reveal financial information about prior companies? And if not, then if a company is operating a loss, wouldn't it be better to just shut down that company and start over with a new company and then move forward with the application?
Yeah, see, this is something that's very unique about the 8A program, is that when you fill out your 413 form, your personal financial statement, SBA will run a credit check on every applicant. So if you, as an owner or the qualifying party for your application, own other businesses, you also need to disclose that you own other companies, because the thing is that also gets figured into the total revenue of all the companies that you own. And so if you are making a lot of money with another company, but you're actually going to get this other company into the program, you could actually be considered large through affiliation because you have ownership into another firm. So, and we run into this a lot with a lot of other companies who open up businesses, but they really don't do anything with it. All they wanted to do was just keep the name. So what they did is they opened up a LLC just to secure the name, but they really didn't, the LLC didn't conduct any kind of business. Well, they have to submit information, meaning all of, any kind of tax returns, if you did anything with it, or all the information for that business. They want to know who owns the company, what percentage of ownership. So it makes your application a lot bigger. But a lot of times, most companies, if they haven't done anything with it, they just close the company. What they'll do is they'll just dissolve the company, and then it makes it easier for them to get into the program. And that's probably something that, Steve, you probably get into a lot of that with your company.
Yes, I do. I mean, I get into a lot of affiliation questions, and any time an individual owns or has, certainly if they have a majority ownership, but any sort of controlling interest or controlling even management position in two companies, those companies in the SBA's eyes are likely going to be considered one and the same for size purposes. So it's the example hypothetically that I give clients is, let's say that Bill Gates tomorrow goes out and decides he wants to form, a small business that has zero revenues at all. Well, that business, as far as the SBA is concerned, is still, tagged with all of Microsoft revenues because Bill controls Microsoft and he controls this business, so it's not a genuine small business in the eyes of the SBA just because it's got a different corporate identity. So that's how affiliation works. And so if you're in that position where you have multiple interests in multiple companies, you need to assume. And by the way, it's not prohibited for an SBA, for an 8A company to have affiliates. It can have affiliates so long as I think the two key considerations are met. Number one, that the combined revenues or employees of those affiliate companies do not exceed the primary industry code of the applicant firm. Then we talked about the size just previously there. The size standard in an 8A company has to be a small business. And second, in order to qualify an 8A company for the program, again, this is not for tribally owned, but for companies owned by individuals. The disadvantaged individual, or one of the disadvantaged individuals, if there are two or more, needs to work 40 hours or more, essentially, full-time for the 8A company during normal working hours. The regulation says full-time during normal working hours of firms in the same or similar line of work. And so in my experience, when SBA sees that the disadvantaged individual who's trying to qualify an 8A company has interest in other companies, they first, of course, will add together all the revenues or employees and see whether that combined entity is still small. But even if that works, even if that passes the size test, they then say, well, wait a second, if you've got two other companies, how is it that you're able to work full-time during normal working hours for this applicant? Aren't you distracted by your duties for these other companies? And so you have to be prepared to explain that too. Say, hey, yeah, I own this interest, but I'm just an investor. Somebody else manages the day-to-day. It's really a management question, a time question when it comes to the full-time employee rule. So those are some of the issues we have to jump through when someone's trying to qualify a company for the 8A program, but they also have interests in other companies.
You got it. Should we jump in and talk a little bit about the application process itself?
Yes. Okay. The 8A application is an online application. In order for you to even start the process, you have to be registered in SAM, System for Award Management, which is what we have on the screen. Anybody who wants to do business with the government has to be registered in this database. That's how they assign you a cage code, they pay you, all your information is pulled through IRS and Dun & Bradstreet, basically verifying that you in fact are in good standing with the state and that you are registered an actual company, because Dun & Bradstreet does check to make sure that your company does exist. Go ahead. The second thing is in the same website with SAM, once you get towards the end of the registration process, there's actually 4 parts in the registration process. When you get to the very end at the point of contacts, you will have a little button at the bottom that will say SBA register/update. And if you don't click on that button, you actually aren't entered into SBA's website. And this is the website that you would put in your keywords, your capability statement. It basically pulled everything from SAM into SBA's website. And this is where you get assigned a number from SBA, which would be a P number. And it's one of the items that will be asked in your application. Okay, so once you get accepted into the program, this is actually SBA's website where they would put in the day that you got accepted into the program and the day you exit out. So, and you would have dates in here. So it's very important that you are registered in this system.
Yeah, and just to jump in on that, it's essential that you register in SAM. One thing to note is that when it comes time to register in SAM, you can choose, and you should, after good faith due diligence, you self-certify as to whether or not you're small under various size standards associated with various NAICS codes. You can do that as part of your SAM profile. You cannot self-certify as 8A. If you're certified as an 8A company by the SBA, then the SBA will go to your SAM profile, your DSBS, and populate that with the appropriate certification. It's not a size as a self-certification. 8A is a formal SBA certification that you cannot amend on your profile. So if you see a competitor, it says 8A on their profile. It's not that they went in and fraudulently self-certified as 8A. It's that the SBA labeled them as such in their profile.
Correct. So then once you've gone through those 2 steps, then once you become active in SAM and you've been assigned a number through the DSBS system, then you would go to the GLS website, which is the General Login System, which is actually SBA's website, and register for an account. Here you create your own username, you put in your name, your address, and the reason why it's asking for date of birth and the 4 last digits of your Social Security number, it's because it's basically for security reasons. So if you forgot what your password was, you went in there, hit the forgot password, you put in your username, and then you put in your date of birth and the 4 digits of the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, and then it would email you a link where you could reset your password. So that's what that's used for. And every system in the government goes through a validation. So once you set yourself up in here and set up your username, you put in your email address, you will get an email from the GLS system with a temporary password that you can go back and log, and it comes like within 2 minutes. You get an email, and it'll say, okay, here's your temporary password. You log back, you go back to the website, enter in your username, put in the temporary password, and then it'll pop up with you to reset your password. One of the things I have found out with the GLS system is that now the government is requiring every 90 days that you change your password. It never used to be like, they never used to have you change your password every 90 days. You could keep the same password for year after year. But 6 months ago, everybody started going to the system where you change your password every 90 days. Okay, with that said, once you get into the system, you'll accept the terms and conditions, and then you will be at the main page. And in order for you to get into the system, you'll click on the 8A application, and then you'll come up with a window that has the overview. And to the right, I didn't put those, the checklist, but there is a checklist which they call a 1010, which is all of the company information that you fill out. Ownership of the company, where it's located at, what your primary names code is, when you've been in business, when you started the company. All that information goes in there. Once you fill that out, it'll start populating the forms that you, as the business, need to fill out, meaning the 1010 individual. So say you're a company, you're a corporation, and there's only there's 2 owners, you and your husband. You'll fill it out. You female is Native American, so you'll fill out that you're 51% owner, your husband's 49% owner, but you also have a board of directors. So you're also going to list those board of directors, meaning, you'll probably be the president, your husband may be the vice president, or how do you have it labeled, but maybe you have a secretary and a treasurer. Well, you're also going to have to list those individuals in the 1010. And what it'll ask in the application is whether or not they are socially/economically disadvantaged. And what you're going to click is you're going to click no, and that the percentage of ownership is 0, so that it doesn't populate an SF 413 form, which is the personal financial statement. It will populate a 9112 form, as Steve had mentioned earlier, and I mentioned earlier, is it goes to character of the your owners and your board members. So this is where we get the biggest hiccup with a lot of tribes, because you have a board of directors, and a lot of board of directors don't like to fill out the 9112 form, because in the 9112 form you have to put in your birth date, your Social Security number, and where you live, because it's they're basically making sure that you there isn't anything else that comes up for your company. So individually owned companies, they're fine with it because they know. But when you start dealing with tribes, this seems to be the biggest obstacle that a lot of the tribes have. And I don't know, Stephen, what do you?
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, I'll be honest with you here. In my role here as an attorney, I don't get too far into the details of the actual application submission. I have reviewed and critiqued dozens upon dozens of 8A applications. I've never done the electronic submission myself. Why? People don't want to pay legal rates for someone to do that for them, and I tell them that straight up. So this is really a good section. I think, Vanessa, you probably are the best one to take the lead on this stuff because it sounds like you have had actual experience going through this with clients repeatedly.
Yeah. We do want to make sure that we save a little bit of time to talk about, you know, what happens if the application is not accepted. But Vanessa, do you want to maybe just walk through the quickly the details of the actual, you know, application itself, and then we can talk about what happens if the application is denied.
Yeah, and like we said, you know, basically you'll populate forms, you'll fill out the forms. If you have questions, you know, after the presentation, you can give us a call and we can answer those questions. But there are 6 steps that once you have completed all the areas in your application, you'll get little green check marks saying that, okay, well, you've completed this. So your step 1 would be that you would, you know, you download the authorization form because that has to be notarized by the qualifying party, so you'll have to have that. That'll be part of your application. And then once you do that, you can download the checklist of all the supporting documentation you have to submit. Even though you're doing this online, you still have to submit a hard copy of all the documentation. I know people are like, well, it seems like redundant. Well, what had happened before, prior to people going online and entering their application, they used to actually send a hard copy of everything, and SBA, the people at SBA would actually enter it into the system. Well, because of the economy and, you know, decrease in workforce, they can't do that. You can still submit a hard copy, but it'll just take a lot longer for your application to go through the process. They can't force you to do it online, but you know, just keep in mind that if you wanted to move along, it's better for you to enter it online yourself. So once you have completed all the steps, you've downloaded all your checklists, you've had your authorization form notarized, and you have all your supporting documentation put in the format. There's actually a format that you have to package your application in, and you also have to 2-hole punch it at the top. You submit this application to SBA. Now, if you're anywhere from Texas on west, your application is going to go to San Francisco, and anything east is going to go to Philadelphia. So when you're doing your application, based on where you're located at, it will actually tell you which office you're going to send it to. With that said, and what I would suggest, because we're all human and applications do get lost, so you need to send your application with some kind of confirmation. If you're going to send it by the Postal Service, make sure you get, you know, send it second day or next day. Make sure that you have whoever's receiving it sign it, so that if 30 days have gone by, you haven't heard anything back, you can say, oh, well, so-and-so signed it on such and such a day, then they can hunt it down. Because if you don't know when they actually receive it, you just send it regular by the post office, mail it in, there's no way for them to track it. And there's no way for you to know when it actually made it to their office. So, and the SBA is pretty good about reviewing it within 15 days. And what they'll do is they'll go through it. And I say very quickly because I know there's a lot of stuff that they missed that was actually in the application. But they'll go through it, they'll go through the list, check it, make sure that all your documentation's in there. Then if they find deficiencies, meaning that there's additional information that they're going to require, Maybe they have a question that we brought up earlier. You own other companies, but you didn't include that in your application. They'll put it as a deficiency. Or if you have outside employment that are shown on your personal tax returns that you didn't say, they want to know that, are you still working there, or did you resign? You know, how are you able to devote full-time commitment to your company? So there could be a wide array of questions that they may have just to understand your company, the company structure, and the management and control. So what will happen is once they identify those deficiencies, you can get anywhere, and every application comes back with deficiencies. In the 15 years I've been doing this, I am communicating with other consultants who also do 8A applications. There has never been an application that has not come back with deficiencies. There's always questions about something, you know, and it may have been in the packet, but maybe they just overlooked it. But you know, there's always a question back that comes back. So depending on how many.
I will second that too. I've never seen one either, Vanessa. I've never seen one either.
I think the quickest application that we've ever had is I've gotten one approved in 30 days, but that was back 2 years ago. Now it's a lot longer, but which was actually 30 days from the time we submitted to the time they actually got their approval letter. It was 30 days exactly, and that was kind of shocking. But he still had deficiencies, and they allowed him to email. It was just like maybe 3 or 4 questions, and they allowed him to email those in, and he got certified. But because of the economy, there's so many applications coming in now that SBA no longer keeps them. They send you the whole packet back. If you have more than 8 deficiencies, expect to receive your application back. And what you, as the business, you need to answer those deficiencies and put your answers on top of your packet. Don't stick them back into the application. You leave the application intact, and you put your deficiencies on top and resubmit the whole thing again back to SBA. So, and then once they deem your application complete, then it gets forwarded to DC, and then you got another 90 days to wait for final determination on whether or not you get accepted into the program. So, do you have anything to add, Stephen?
Yeah, I think that covers it really well. One thing that I tell any client who wants to work with me, especially from the get-go on an 8A application, is I say, the hidden criteria for 8A success is really it's perseverance, it's patience, it's the ability to continue to push on despite what appears to be oftentimes governmental red tape, SBA not understanding concepts you think might be clear when they send back these deficiency letters. If you're eligible for the program, if you meet all the eligibility criteria and you work hard at it and you're willing to spend some time and some effort at it, work with people who know what they're doing, you're going to get in. But it's not going to necessarily be smooth sailing. And so, again, no matter who you work with, you're going to almost inevitably get one of those deficiency letters back. I don't have any inside knowledge of this, but I almost think that in some cases SBA sends these back just to see, if you have the willingness to put, if you're how badly do you want this? Are you going to push forward on this process?
Yep, and you're exactly right. Because if you look at some of the deficiencies, you're like, that was already included in the packet. And I always tell my clients, I said, they're testing you. They want to see how bad you want to get into the program, and you have to be patient. They basically control, whether you get in or out. So to argue with them, you're just going to be, you'd have better response talking to a wall. So it's just better for you to, make it as clear and concise as possible and resubmit it. I've had companies that have gone, we've done actually 2 resubmissions of deficiencies, and they've gotten accepted into the 8A program. So, and it's just based on the fact that they did qualify and that they were patient enough to just, submit their answers, each time.
Vanessa, we just have just a couple more minutes. If you could walk through, and maybe if you could just speak real briefly, and then Steve, if you could speak briefly about what happens if you go through that process and ultimately the application gets denied. What happens then?
Okay. If your application gets denied, you have 45 calendar days to give your reason why you should be accepted into the program. And they will write you a letter telling you exactly why you were denied. And I'll tell you, most of the time that people get denied is not going to be based on because your financials are weak. It's going to be surrounded around management and control of the company. And that's where I see a lot of denials come in. We had one, the last one we had was the fact that the owner had borrowed money from, or she didn't borrow money, her sister actually gave her money to help her fund her company. Well, I told her, I said, just have her, I go, do you have to pay the money back to her? She goes, no, she just said, she just gave it to me. I said, okay. So, but SBA wanted to know, because it was on her financials, was this a loan or was this a gift? So her advisor, somebody else she was working with, advised her to have it as a loan. And I said, don't do it as a loan. You're not going to get accepted in, because they're going to say that if she wanted to, she could come in tomorrow and say, I demand all that money back from you, which she probably wasn't going to do that, but because it showed that she had actual control of the firm, because she wouldn't have been able to pay it back, so that means that she would have, acquired the company. And because she wrote it that it was a loan, she got denied, because that's what they came back to her with, is that she didn't demonstrate complete control and management of the company because of the loan. And that wasn't the case, but because that's the way it was presented, she was, her reconsideration for denial was, they upheld it. So
Steve, in your experience, what, as far as once you submit your, response to the denial letter, what at the process, in your experience, what are the percentage of applications that actually ultimately get approved? And do you have any kind of final comments on the denial process and the back and forth and what happens at that point?
Yeah, I mean, and this is when I tend to get involved a fair bit in the process for the first time. A lot of folks do their 8A applications themselves. They don't want to invest in outside assistance, and then they get denied. And then they're saying, okay, I need a lawyer to help me with this. And so that is often the case when I get involved. It doesn't necessarily make my job as easy as if I had been involved from the get-go with respect to some of these eligibility items. I've seen denial letters that had, I think, 26, 27 reasons for denial. Needless to say, we did not, the Cont elected not to proceed with the reconsideration on that item. A few things for reconsideration to keep in mind. First of all, the name reconsideration is a little misleading. Reconsideration, to me, just in common parlance, suggests that you're telling the SBA, look, we think you got it wrong. Please take another look at it. A reconsideration request can be that, but what it really is doing, and I think Vanessa encapsulated this, what you're really doing is responding to the items in the denial letter, including submitting new documents. And so a lot of times, I get a denial letter, they'll say, you know what, we didn't like section 4 of your operating agreement because it allows your minority owner to veto your decisions. And so we think that means you're not in unconditional control of the company. Control, as Vanessa mentioned, a big item. So what do? I mean, you just fix your operating agreement. You delete that section, say, oh, here's our revised and amended operating agreement. It was adopted this day. You send it in with your request for reconsideration, and now that's your governing document, and they will consider that as part of reconsideration. So I don't know specific numbers. I mean, I would venture to guess that, more often than not, the reconsideration requests I've worked on have succeeded, in part because when it's clear to me that it's not going to work, I tend to counsel the client not to go forward. But also because you're able to actually fix things. And so if it's a paperwork issue, we can fix it. If you didn't provide enough detail about something, we can provide the detail. One I'm working on right now, we're providing new resumes. They thought, as we go back to the beginning of the presentation that the disadvantaged individual didn't have enough experience. Actually, she does, but she submitted a very cursory resume with her initial application that didn't show that experience. So we're going to show that on reconsideration, hopefully help get her in that way. And so it's a process really of fixing the problems in your initial application and asking the SBA to issue a new decision based on that record. The one thing I would point out, and why I brought up finally that 26, 27, 28 item denial, is that to prevail on reconsideration, you need to overcome every basis for denial. And typically the SBA will number them. They'll say, reason number 1, reason number 2, right there. And you need to prevail on all of them. Any basis for denial that is not overcome will cause the application to be denied. So I've had some, had one recently, unfortunately, where we overcame like 3 out of 4. And so, next year, after the 1-year period passes, this client will be able to reapply, knowing now what she needs to do is something that we couldn't really fix, but just gave it a try anyway. But at least we were able to satisfy the SBA with respect to 3 out of 4 items. But she's still not in the program, knows what she needs to do next year to get in, but still not in now because she didn't overcome all 4 of the bases for denial.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve, and thank you both, Vanessa and Steve, for presenting today's program. It looks like we've actually worked through, as we were going through the program, all of the questions that are in the queue. If you are on the call or listening to the program and you do have follow-up questions, again, we've got the contact information for Vanessa and Steve here as part of the PowerPoint outline that will be available on the website. I would invite everybody to go to the TribalTelecomConference.com website, click on the tab for Education, and then go to Webinars, and you can see the list of upcoming webinars. The next webinar is on October 21st. It's titled Winning Grant Funds for Tribal Telecom Projects. We also have a webinar on October 28th that is not up on the website now, but it will be very soon, called Joint Venturing and Teaming for Federal Set-Aside Contracts, and Steve will be back presenting that program. And then finally, be sure to save the date for the conference next year, May 4th through 7th, 2015. And again, you can get the information on the TribalTelecomConference.com website. Finally, we would ask that you take just a minute or two to complete our post-webinar survey and really help us select future topics that will be most beneficial to you and your community. So thank you again for attending today's webinar, and enjoy the rest of your day.